You're watching India Global. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. Let's start the show with headlines this evening. First up, India-China to hold key border talks on the 18th of December. National Security Adviser Ajit Doval will meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing. Ukraine eliminates Putin's nuclear defense force chief. Russia's Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov has been killed in a bomb blast by Ukraine. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau loses key ally as deputy resigns after a clash over policies. Canadian Prime Minister faces fresh calls to resign. Is Trudeau government now in troubled waters? On to our big story today on India Global, coming in from the Maldives, where almost 2 months after Maldivian President Mohamed Muizzu was in New Delhi, there is now an update coming in as far as resetting the relations between the two sides. The Indian Coast Guard's two petrol vessels have arrived in Maldives' capital of Malé as part of their ongoing deployment to the Indian Ocean region. The visit by offshore petrol vessel ICGS Vaibhav and faster petrol vessel ICGS Abhiraj highlight India's efforts to bolster maritime collaboration between the region as part of its mission Sagar. The Indian crew will engage in training with Maldives Defence Forces during their 4-day stay, focusing on enhancing maritime security capabilities as well as maritime search and rescue, as well as ensuring there is maritime law enforcement capabilities are strengthened as far as Maldives is concerned. And after their Maldivian visit, the vessels will continue to Sri Lanka with planned stops in Colombo and Galle to engage with their Sri Lankan counterparts. Interestingly, Sri Lankan President Anurakumara Dissanayake only yesterday gave India a key security assurance that Sri Lanka's territory will not be used for any activity that is detrimental to India, signaling that Colombo will not let China dock its vessels. Months after it had let a Chinese research vessel dock at its ports in October this year. It seems India's vessel power play in the Indian Ocean is well in the works, strengthening its maritime security strategies against a growing Chinese threat. Shifting focus now to the latest that's unfolding in Myanmar, a crisis that is only developing into a much bigger version of it. As the civil war rages and the international community condemns his every move, General Minister Aung San's grip on the country's power remains strong. But at what cost? As Myanmar's teeters on the edge of destruction, this next report tells you all you need to know about the Junta's chief, who is on the brink of having an ICC arrest warrant issued against him.
In the shadows of Myanmar's turmoil, one man has seized the reins of power with an iron grip. His thirst for control has plunged the nation into chaos and bloodshed. General Min Aung Hlaing's rise to power was no accident. It was the culmination of decades of cold calculation and military might. Born into a family of modest means, he ascended through the ranks of Myanmar's brutal military regime. By 2011, as the country transitioned to a semi-civilian government, Hlaing was already pulling strings behind the scenes. When Myanmar civilian leaders dared to challenge the military's iron-fisted control, Min Aung Hlaing didn't hesitate. In February 2021, he orchestrated a coup that ousted Aung San Suu Kyi and her government, throwing the country into the fires of civil war. The reasons? Accusations of foul play following the November 2020 elections. He painted himself as the savior of Myanmar, but his rule has been anything but that. Under his leadership, the military has brutally silenced dissent, crushed protests, and committed atrocities that have led the world to call him a war criminal. His military has been accused of ethnic cleansing, including against the Rohingya, a chapter of violence that earned him the international scorn he so readily ignores. Almost 5 years on, the ICC chief prosecutor has finally demanded a warrant against the general. But the tainted general is not alone. With the support of China and Russia, Min Aung Hlaing has managed to cling to power, keeping the junta afloat in the face of global sanctions and growing opposition. They've become his crutch, helping him maintain control while the country burns. But at what cost? How much longer will this general, this architect of tyranny, hold on before the walls of his regime come crashing down? One thing is clear: as long as he holds the reins, Myanmar's nightmare is far from over. With Arjun Samar Mahindran, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Shifting focus now to Donald Trump, where a New York judge has upheld Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts tied to hush money payments, rejecting his argument for dismissal based on presidential immunity. The Supreme Court previously ruled that presidents are protected from prosecution for official actions while in office. But Judge Merchan decided Trump's crimes involved unofficial conduct and were not covered by those protections. In his 41-page ruling, the judge stated the evidence focused solely on actions outside Donald Trump's presidential duties. He also emphasized that not everything a president does is considered official. The decision keeps Trump's historic conviction intact, potentially making him the first convicted felon to serve as president. Trump's team has called the ruling a violation of the Supreme Court's stance on immunity. All right, turning our attention now to the latest in the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia has suffered a major setback. Reports suggest that a remote explosive device planted in a scooter close to a residential apartment block in Moscow has killed Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov early on Tuesday. He was the head of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical defense forces. Kirillov's assistant has also died in the blast. On Monday, Ukraine's security services charging Kirillov with the use of banned chemical weapons during Russia's military operation in Ukraine that started in February 2022. Before we move any further, listen in to this important soundbite coming in.
В результате произошедшего погиб начальник войск радиационной, химической и биологической защиты Вооруженных сил Российской Федерации Игорь Кириллов и его помощник. На месте происшествия работают следователи, криминалисты и оперативные службы. Проводятся следственные действия и оперативно-розыскные мероприятия, направленные на установление всех обстоятельств совершенного преступления.
That was the Russian spokesperson as far as the death of the general is concerned. And on the battlefield, Russian forces claim taking control of a settlement and carrying out strikes on Ukrainian ammunition depots, electronic warfare base stations, military airfield infrastructure and other targets. General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, on the other hand, has claimed that its forces engaged in more than 200 clashes with Russian forces on Monday. The White House has said that North Korean troops have been killed fighting Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk border region. And reports indicate that the killing of General Igor was a special operation by Ukraine's SBU security service. Over in the US, President-elect Donald Trump has slammed Joe Biden for allowing the use of long-range US missiles to attack deep inside Russian territory. President-elect said that he expects solving the Russian-Ukrainian war will be more difficult given the fact that Biden gave his nod on that. Listen in to what he had to say on this.
More difficult is going to be the Russia-Ukraine situation. I see that as more difficult. I don't think they should have allowed missiles to be shot 200 miles into Russia. I think that was a bad thing. And that brought the Koreans in, North Korea, another man I get along with very well. I'm the only one that does.
Right on to the other war that's happening in the Middle East. Well, in the Palestine, there's been now a rare crackdown against local terror groups in the West Bank area, sending in armored cars and engaging in fierce gun battles that have killed at least 2 people. Israeli defense minister has said that he believes negotiators are close to a ceasefire deal in Gaza than at any time since a week-long truce in 2023 November. Israel and the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire late last month, removing a key ally of another terror outfit, that is Hamas, from the battlefield. Now, in the latest, Lebanese troops have deployed in the southern town of Khiam after Israeli forces withdrew from the area in coordination with the UN peacekeeping forces. As far as Washington is concerned, US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff hosted a reception at the White House on Monday night in honor of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, and where President Biden used the occasion to say that and talk about his Jewish friends, colleagues, and supporters. Listen in.
I learned a long time ago, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. I'm a Zionist. Happy Hanukkah to everyone. Jill and I and Kamal and Doug are honored to host you here at the White House.
On the other West Asia war front, Israeli troops continue to operate inside a UN demilitarized buffer zone in Israeli-occupied Golan Heights on Monday. This one day after the government approved a plan to double the number of Israeli citizens in the area. This comes at the heels of HTS Chief Abu Muhammad al-Julani saying that a social contract between the state and all religions in the country is needed to ensure social justice. All right, on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side with lots more news and stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India Global. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. We now turn our attention to the most sensational story on the show, which is the Chinese spy who managed to infiltrate the royal army. In fact, a royal family. Prince Andrew is now at the center of a huge storm where it seems that the Chinese spy managed to forge deep links with him, and who knows what was the kind of information that actually exchanged hands. This report tells you the extent to which now the Chinese threat looms large in the UK and just how significant this scandal could be for the royal family as well. Take a look.
UK's Prince Andrew, who was slammed for his close ties to the late American paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, has again played troublemaker for the royal family. This time through his association with alleged Chinese spy Yang Tengbo. UK authorities have alleged that Tengbo formed an unusual degree of trust with Prince Andrew and developed relationships with politicians to be leveraged by China. It emerged over the weekend that Tengbo had been banned from entering the UK in 2023 when he was accused of engaging in covert and deceptive activity on behalf of the Chinese state. He was labelled as a threat to UK national security. Before his entry to UK was curtailed, Yang had access to prominent figures in the British establishment. According to reports, UK authorities believed he was associated with the United Front Work Department, the secretive arm of the Chinese government that organizes Beijing's cultural influence operations. The organization is linked to several cases of alleged Chinese state interference in Western countries. Tengbo has said that he's done nothing wrong and was not a spy. Reports suggest intelligence officials have frequently warned about China's increasing efforts to influence UK government policy through relationships with high-profile elites. The reach of the alleged spy can be gauged from the fact that he'd also met two prime ministers. He has been pictured alongside former Tory leaders David Cameron and Theresa May, according to reports. There's no suggestion that either of them were aware of his reported links to the Chinese state, and it's not known when the images were taken. China has rebuffed the claims and termed the allegations at groundless hype.
中国行事一向堂堂正正、光明磊落，从不搞什么欺骗、干涉。对这种以己夺人的无端炒作，不值一驳。
Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has refused to comment directly on Andrew or the royals, but said the government is concerned about the challenge that China poses. Prince Andrew has said that he had ceased all contact with the individual once concerns were raised. However, the fallout from the espionage row seems to have hit him already, as reports say that he will not be joining the rest of the royal family for for the traditional Christmas gathering. The development marks a year that has already been quite difficult for the British royal family. Prince William recently described 2024 as brutal following cancer diagnosis for his wife and father. The latest turn of events right before the year ends has again put unwanted spotlight on the family, and this time it runs the risk of creating a geopolitical crisis. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
All right, tragic incident has unfolded at a restaurant in a popular mountain resort in Georgia. Indian mission confirmed that at least 11 Indian citizens have died. Authorities say the victims, also all employees of the same restaurant, were found in their bedroom on the second floor of the establishment. Among the 11 Indian nationals who died of carbon monoxide poisoning at a restaurant in Georgia is a young man from Punjab's Ludhiana who had moved to the country just 6 months back. Samir Kumar, who was 26, was from Khanna town in Ludhiana, and after moving to Georgia, he had been working at Haveli restaurant in the area where the tragedy unfolded. Some of those family members have been speaking. Listen in to their gut-wrenching tale.
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਬਰਫੀਲਾ ਤੂਫਾਨ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਆਇਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਠੰਡ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੀ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਨਰੇਟਰ ਵਾਲਾ ਹੀਟਰ ਚਲਾਇਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੁਝ ਐਸਾ ਕੁਝ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਨਰੇਟਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਗੈਸ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਬਣੀ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਹੀਟਰ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਬਣਿਆ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ 12 ਦੇ 12 ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਸੁੱਤੇ ਹੀ ਰਹਿ ਗਏ ਜੀ।
3 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਜੀ ਇੱਥੇ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਦੁਬਈ 'ਚ ਸੀਗਾ 4 ਮਹੀਨੇ, 2 ਸਾਲ ਲਾਏ ਦੁਬਈ 'ਚ ਤੇ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਜੋਰਦੀਆ ਇੱਥੇ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਜੀ, ਉੱਥੇ ਇਹਦੀ ਮੌਤ ਹੋ ਗਈ।
ਕਿਵੇਂ ਮੌਤ ਹੋਈ, ਕੁਝ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਾ? ਕਿਹਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਆਇਆ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ?
ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਆ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ, ਹਜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ ਜੀ।
ਘਰੇ ਕੌਣ ਕੌਣ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੇ?
ਘਰੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਪਿਓ ਹੀ ਆ ਜੀ, ਇੱਕ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਬਸ।
All right, Chef Vikas Khanna added another feather in his cap by winning a Michelin award for his New York restaurant bungalow. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and his partner recently dined there, and so did Shah Rukh Khan and his entire family. Here's what Vikas Khanna told NDTV when we caught up with him.
Just telling us before we started the interview about this week and this month being extremely special. So please tell us more about all the different honors that bungalow has got and how you feel about them.
आपसे बात कर रहा हूँ, honor 1. I just feel के awards come and go. What you stand for as a purpose is more important. एक देसी लड़का देसी हेरिटेज रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा है, जिसको स्कूल में कहा गया था कि देसी खाना मत बनाओ, गोरों के नीचे काम करो, यही आपकी पहचान है। तो मेरे को लगता था कि एज अ ग्रैंडसन ऑफ फ्रीडम फाइटर्स फैमिलीज़ एंड अमृतसर एंड विद दैट पेट्रियाटिज्म, आई एम लाइक मैं एक, वो कहते थे दिस डिश वाज इन्वेंटेड इन बर्गंडी, ये ऐसे बनाओ। तो मैंने कहा वो किसी की दादी का खाना मैं क्यों बनाऊँ, मेरे को अपना खाना बनाना है। I think that rebellious nature was the one which defined a lot of people's kids' choices of going to colleges. मैंने सेट कि वो तो नहीं कह रहे कि मैं अमृतसर की एक दादी का खाना बनाना सीखना चाहता हूँ, आई एम गोइंग टू लर्न दैट। दे आर रिप्रेजेंटिंग देमसेल्व्स। हमें इतनी ज़्यादा क्यों वैलिडेशन की ज़रूरत है कि हमको उनको रिप्रेजेंट करना। आई स्टैंड हियर विद प्राइड, विद माई ओन कंट्री, विद माई ओन एंथम, विद माई ओन फ्लैग विद मी, विद माई ओन हेरिटेज, माई ओन हिस्ट्री। कहीं से मेरी कोई चीज़ भी है वो मैं नहीं कह सकता कि मुझे वैलिडेशन की ज़रूरत थी, तभी मैं फ्रेंच का वर्ड मैंने ऐड किया बीच में। मुझे नहीं ज़रूरत है, मेरे को नहीं, इंडिया को नहीं ज़रूरत। जब एक इतना गहरा कल्चर होता है, हमें नहीं ज़रूरत है कि दिस इज़ ऑल हैपनिंग ऑन वॉट एवर हैपन दिस वीक, इट हैपन ऑन इट्स ओन टर्म्स। इट्स मच बिगर देन changing accents and changing your cuisine so that you fit into a different culture. We need to get people to fit into our culture. That's what the West did to us. We need to be so proud of it that they feel proud कि भाई we are having something so pure and authentic.
And with so much of history to it.
इससे ज़्यादा हिस्ट्री कहाँ पे है मुझे बताओ। इससे ज़्यादा एक डिश को पकड़ो आप, बाय गॉड कि कितनी हिस्ट्री है उस मसाले में जो उसमें जाता है, जो खाना बन रहा है, उसकी तासीर क्या है, उसकी टेम्परेचर्स पे क्या है, उसकी एंड इट्स सच अ टेक्निकल क्यूजीन, इतनी टेक्निकल खाना है देसी खाना हमारा, एंड मुझे तो लगता नहीं कुछ उसके साथ कुछ मैच भी करता है। और क्यों हमें फोर्स किया जाता है कि फ्रेंच बेकरी सब खोलो और सब फ्रेंच खाना बनाओ, क्यों? Why can't we redefine the halwai culture of India?
And do you think now it's changing? And thanks to you also and the example that you're set, because now maybe an Indian boy, an Indian girl, telling their parent that they want to become a chef is not going to be faced with as many questions as you might have faced.
वो तो फर्क पड़ा because of Master Chef's influence, वो तो देखा हमने कि पिछले 15 साल से होस्ट कर रहा हूँ almost मैं वो show, and it's been a privilege, absolute privilege, that you can enter every home into the deeper sides of the villages, कि बिल्कुल ही रिमोट जगह पे आपकी आवाज़ पहुंचती है कंट्री में। वो बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है कि आप बोलते क्या हैं, कि आप उनको क्या मैसेज दे रहे हैं, कि you need to be proud and loud about your heritage.
It comes to books, you don't stick to any one genre. It's fiction, children's books, non-fiction, all kinds of books. So you lead a very creative life, and I want to know, why is writing so important to you, and so much of writing?
मैंने पापा को 50 बुक्स का प्रॉमिस किया था। आई होप आई कीप इट, क्योंकि मैं अच्छा बोलता नहीं हूँ। मुझे इंग्लिश से बहुत दिक्कत थी बहुत साल तक, तो मुझे एक्सप्रेस तो करना था अपने आप को। तो द ओनली फाइंडिंग अ चैनल फॉर दैट, राइटिंग बिकेम अ चैनल फॉर दैट। लिखना शुरू किया मैंने, कहानियाँ लिखनी शुरू की, फिक्शन लिखनी शुरू की। आप कोई भी मेरी कुक बुक उठाएंगे, हेड नोट्स में आपको पूरी कहानी मिलेगी क्यों ये डिश है।
All right, I hope Vikas Khanna's words are prophetic and Indian halwais go ahead and break global cultural barriers. On that note, we slip into a very short break on India Global. We come back on the other side with our key focus on India-China ties as special representative talks begin tomorrow. Stay with us. You're watching India Global. I'm Gaurie, Dwivedi. We turn our attention to the latest that's unfolding in Canada, where Finance Minister of Justin Trudeau's government has quit. She was one of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's most powerful and loyal ministers, unexpectedly resigned on Monday over a policy clash with the Prime Minister, dismissing his plans for increasing spending as political gimmicks. In fact, Freeland quit just hours before she was due to present a fall economic update to Parliament, a document widely expected to show the minority Liberal government had a much larger budget deficit than was predicted earlier. And soon after she resigned and her sudden resignation, her cabinet colleagues was sworn in as Canada's new finance minister. Mr. LeBlanc, a long-time ally of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, served as the public safety minister in his cabinet. The move comes at a time when Canada is grappling with a $62 billion deficit, $22 billion more than initially projected due to unexpected expenses. Freeland's resignation, who also served as deputy prime minister, leaves Trudeau without a key ally in his cabinet ahead of the 2025 elections, which could be very tricky. Before we move any forward, let's first listen in to the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, what he had to say on the fluidity that Justin Trudeau's government is currently facing.
What we are seeing is the government of Canada itself is spiraling out of control right before our eyes and at the very worst time. Today, mere hours before Trudeau's finance minister was to deliver a fall economic update that was expected to smash through her already massive deficit targets, she announced she no longer has confidence in the Prime Minister. Canadians were already anxious about the reckless $40 billion deficit the government had announced last spring, but today, in mere hours, they were expected to learn that it was much higher than that, threatening our social programs and our fiscal stability right in the middle of a potential trade war.
What does this mean in terms of Trudeau losing his key ally? We put out the big questions that we would put to our guests joining us in a minute, which is first and foremost, is the Trudeau government now on the brink of collapse? The second big question we ask on the debate is Canadian economy now under intense pressure. Remember, spending is already more than what it was anticipated. The deficit is much higher than what it was budgeted for. And there are going to be the Trump tariffs come January. And the third important question we ask is how will Canada offset those Trump tariffs given its present economic situation? Let's put that out. Before we get, we'll get Professor Swaran Singh in just a bit. And we also have Mithali Nikore, who is an economist, joining me on the show. Mithali, let me put this to you in terms of the fluidity that the Canadian government, the Canadian economy is facing right now. How do you see it? There's political uncertainty and there is an economic crisis brewing as well.
Absolutely. I mean, Gaurie, this is one of the situations that no economy wants to find itself in, where, the economic leadership of the country, resigns just before a massive trade war is coming. And I do feel that there's going to be a re-engineering and a renegotiation even of the North Africa Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, as we call it, because, Trump has not only talked about tariffs in between the US and Canada, but also between the US and Mexico. So, a lot of new global supply chains are going to emerge, and a number of emerging economies like India, the UAE, and East Asia actually stand to benefit from, the proposed tariffs that President Trump is coming up with. And in this situation, I mean, I think an economy like Canada really needs to play to its strengths, really needs to shore up its banking sector, really needs to shore up its oil and gas sector, and also innovation and renewable energy. But we are not seeing that kind of leadership. And, I mean, this is how a lot of emerging economies react, not one of the most developed economies in the world.
Right. Let's also get in Professor Singh. He's a fellow of the Canada Global Affairs Institute and a former visiting professor and scholar of the University of British Columbia. Professor Singh, always good to have you on the show. How do you see the present developments, the political uncertainty that Justin Trudeau is facing?
I think, Gaurie, it's a story almost now going to be 2 years since continuously one after another challenge to Justin Trudeau's leadership. What is interesting is increasingly the challenge has now come from within his Liberal Party. And now the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, who has her own very strong reputation, has herself resigned, questioned his leadership. Jagmeet Singh, the new Democratic Party, which was also a supporter of coalition government of Justin Trudeau, is also asking for his resignation. I think situation is becoming increasingly untenable for him to continue. And in that sense, I think it is going to be perhaps time that he has to think of leaving. Canada in general has been facing enormous problems of inflation, of fiscal deficit, and budget has been a major problem. From the targeted 60 billion, 40 billion, now it is reached already 60 billion. Health crisis of healthcare, housing crisis, inflation, price rise, and so on. And on top of it, now President Donald Trump threatening to have another tariff war with Justin Trudeau. In that sense, I think this resignation of Vice Prime Minister, particularly questioning his whole audacity to sustain his leadership by GST holidays, sales tax holidays, and so on, when he needs to really control fiscal deficit, is something that I think is becoming increasingly untenable, questioning his leadership. And I think this is time for him that I think increasingly not only media and opposition or several other civil society people, but his own party is now asking. I understand that already 8 members of parliament have publicly spoken asking for his resignation from within his own party.
But still he stays. Still he
October
continues.
28 was earlier a secret letter asking him to resign.
And my question is, Professor Singh, how long do you think Justin Trudeau would be able to stand against this rising tide of public opinion against him, whether it is the MPs or whether it's the public? How long can he withstand it?
I think there is also some sense of dignity and decorum that I want to invoke here for any political leader whose popularity ratings are going down rapidly. But even otherwise, I mean, he's been 8 years in office. From 40% votes that elected his party in 2015, to coming to 33% in his snap elections of 2019, then again 2021 to 32%. So gradually Liberal Party itself has been losing the public support over years. And of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as I'm saying, is becoming increasingly not only unpopular, unacceptable to his own ministers, to his own senior leaders, to his own party members, to his coalition partners, and so on. So I think here the question is more of decorum and dignity that should, ask him to take the call now, rather than persist with all kinds of, Deputy Prime Minister spoken about his political gimmicks, which
Exactly.
are obviously proving costly. So in that sense, I think dignity and decorum is something that he needs to look at now, as this is time for him to go then, perhaps.
Mitali, you want to come in there in terms of the gimmicks that the former finance minister mentioned, and also the fact that there's erosion of political capital as far as Justin Trudeau is concerned, because these public statements really erode the authority of the office of the Prime Minister, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely correct. And I completely agree with Sir as well. I mean, at the end of the day, what does the Canadian public want today? I mean, I have so many friends who are living there. I have so many, young people from my team who've gone there to study. And the one aspiration that people have is to have good jobs, is to have a decent standard of living, is to have an affordable cost of living. And on all of these three fronts, the government, is supposed to support the people and is supposed to put in policies to actually ignite growth and to bring, the cost of living down. But they have not been able to do this because they have not been able to bring in innovative economic policies. And, even if you bring to the people 2 or 3 economic policies which they look at and they say, yes, this can work. For example, looking at public-private partnerships in infrastructure, and, Canada has such a strong, thriving education economy. It can really leverage that to, create more jobs and to create global centers of excellence. And I mean, Canada also has done so much innovation now on renewable energy. It should be taking that to the global markets. But this kind of, visionary leadership which you require from the Prime Minister is actually missing at this point. I mean, the Prime Minister should be taking.
I'll tell you what is happening. Elections are around the corner. And the easiest way to go about winning elections is by doling out freebies. Something that an economy cannot afford, Professor Singh, at a time when there are Trump tariffs pretty much now, about 5 weeks away, 6 weeks away tops. So in that situation, how do you see the Justin Trudeau government surviving going forward, given the fact that, there are tough times ahead?
Indeed, Gaurie, you rightly put it. It's not just the political challenge or political crisis that we have to look at. It's also the economic challenge and economic crisis that one has to look at. Chrystia Freeland has been a very senior minister. She was trade minister, she was foreign minister, she was now finance minister. She had negotiated trade deals with the United States over years. And in that sense, if in her judgment, this is something which absolutely needs to be handled with enormous care, and populism should not be guiding the policy in terms of economic decision making to deal with the fiscal deficit, which is enormous now, is something that is also making it very clear that the clear advantage will therefore go to the opposition if there are snap elections again. I think the mood of the nation is very clearly, with the anxiety about the price rise and housing and healthcare becoming difficult. So it's as much an economic challenge which Canada is really facing. And in that context, coming off President Donald Trump and talking about 20% rise, 25% rise, when you have 75% of exports of Canada are only aimed at United States. So I think it's an economic challenge as well.
Indeed, there are economic challenges, there are political uncertainties, and most importantly, you have a Prime Minister whose authority and capital may have been eroded. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking out the time and speaking to me on India Global. And on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side, talk more about the India-China relationship. What next after disengagement, after de-escalation in that relationship? We come back and talk more. Stay with us. All right, this is India Global. We now turn our focus to the India-China relationship. From reverse gear, is it now moving to overdrive? Well, we are speaking on the eve of the special representative talks that will take place between the two sides, the first in 5 years. What is likely to be on the agenda? What could be the big things that some of these talks would hope to iron out is exactly what we will try and talk through in the next couple of minutes. And also, what could be the key takeaways from this very important visit? Now, the conversation aims to restore flight connectivity, also aims to ensure that trade connectivity between the two sides could actually bolster. Remember, it went through a very patchy period of 4 years plus after the Galwan conflict. There are visa issues, remember, that have been stuck and they've been in deep freeze now for over 4 years. There is an effort to expedite all of that. Most importantly, also to ensure that the government-to-government dialogue, it's gotten a bit of an impetus in the last couple of weeks, but how to further improve on that. And most importantly, the agenda is likely to include the boundary question that continues to remain and fester as an ongoing, lingering issue between India and China. Now, over the course of the next 10 minutes, we'll try and decode some of the big questions that we are asking on the show. First up being that what is the next phase of the border talks that could take place? That's the question, first question that we are asking in the key talks that will take place tomorrow. How will they bridge the trust deficit? Remember, that's the biggest thing that both sides have talked about, especially Dr. Jaishankar, that you've got to get the trust back into the discussion, into the conversation and relationship. And the third key question that we are asking today is, will connectivity restrictions be lifted? Whether it's visa, whether it's transport, whether it's flight, all of that. And of course, trade. Will those restrictions go away? That's exactly what we are now asking on this debate. First up, let's get in General Sanjay Beston, who's joining me on the broadcast, Ashok Sajanar, Ambassador Sajanar, and we also have a China expert, Dr. Tilak Jha as well. Okay, let's start with the General here. Sir, in your estimate, this is an important meeting that will take place. Special representatives will meet. Disengagement has happened. De-escalation has happened. What do you expect from this important meeting tomorrow?
Good evening. Expectations are very, very high. But I would just give an underlying statement that the biggest problem is the border issue. And China has resolved its borders with out of the 14 countries with everyone except India and Bhutan. And unfortunately, we definitely are having this meeting, but till date, China shows Arunachal Pradesh, which is integral part of India, in its maps as part of China, and that is a total cartographic aggression. And of course, Aksai Chin, as it is continuing showing in its maps, and of course the Shaksgam Valley, which Pakistan had ceded. So first and foremost, the biggest concern for anyone is, why doesn't the first talk, in fact, the first point which could be raised is, China should stop showing Arunachal Pradesh as a cartographic aggression in their maps.
Okay.
If that does not happen, let me tell you, I see, yes, you are talking very good issues, connectivity issue and everything. Those are possible. De-escalation is also now gradually happening. Things may get resolved in the border, but let me tell you, on the border, since it is not resolved the border with us and also continues pinpricks in Bhutan, so that will continue to be a friction point. So China wants to deliberately retain these friction points so that at the time of choosing and place, they can do whatever they want to.
Okay, let's ask that to Ambassador Sajanar. Important point, sir. Let me ask that to Ambassador Sajanar. Sir, there are key issues that linger, that fester and impact the relationship. While what is going to happen, the special representative meeting is very important, but how do we get past the trust issue that remains the biggest roadblock?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gaurie, for having me on your show. You know, if you could, if you'll permit, I will, respond to one question that you had posed right at the beginning. Is it going to be an overdrive? Definitely no. It is not going to be an overdrive. As the External Affairs Minister has said, it is going to be a calibrated approach. So it's going to be a slow approach. It's going to be a, gradual approach as far as this is concerned. I think the trust deficit, as you have identified, is the biggest stumbling block. And in that context, I will say that the expectations are not high at all. This is just an initial, the first meeting going to take place after 2019. You would recall that when the special representative meetings started, Gaurie, they started in 2003. 23 meetings have taken place so far. The mandate of the SRs, of the special representatives, is basically to look at the border issue, how to resolve the border issue. We have not really been able to make any headway whatsoever. Now, disengagement has taken place, and de-escalation is still a big issue. The Chinese forces are still stationed not very far away. So de-escalation to the earlier positions definitely has to take place. I would say, in response to the question that you had posed, the ball is squarely in the court of China. China has to make moves so that, the trust deficit to an extent is lessened. I don't think the trust deficit can be removed. It will take a very, very long time, because not only on the border issues, but on other issues, whether it is having, through our neighbors trying to have a string of pearls around India, even on issues like India's membership of the UN Security Council, India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. These are all issues on which China is standing in the way, obstructing the way of India to play a role in in international affairs.
Dr. Jha, let me then ask you, what are your expectations from this visit and from this meeting, and how tempered are they?
Well, I think earlier we were in a situation where we had a luxury of first trusting and then go for verification. Trust and verify was one of the very famous statements by one of the prime minister. Today we are in a situation where we need to verify first and then trust, if at all it may happen. So I think, as earlier speakers have pointed out, we are heading towards disengagement and de-escalation, but I think the trust will come when there is a progress towards demilitarization at some stage, which of course seems to be a long a long possibility. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Calibrated approach, yes, but much more than that. We are also witnessing some pressure on both the nations because of Trump's presidency, which is coming up next year. And there are other economic situations which are also sort of piling up. There is a pressure on economic growth, especially in China. I think that's where they also need to sort of mend fences with India. So I think we have to see it as a political, strategic, and economic context in which I think we can expect that more verification will follow, but trust may happen. Let's see where it goes.
Then General Sanjay, what are you expecting as the takeaways from tomorrow's meeting? Of course, there are good optics that would be at play, but what more? For you, what would be that key deliverable?
See, expectations are really not very, very high. To expect from these meetings, as pointed out earlier also, we have had 23 meetings so far. Nothing on ground. See, the biggest sore issue with China continues to be the border problem. Unresolved borders. And why this country is not solving its borders with India and China is a big question mark. And surprisingly, since I commanded Nathula Brigade, I remember, and till date, Chinese are making lot of incursions in the Masang MK Ridge in Western Bhutan. And the intent is very clear. Why is it entering Western Bhutan? It is basically entering so that it could threaten Siliguri corridor. And if you recollect, in 2017, it tried, making roads and tracks in Doklam. So the intent is very clear. They have got long-term aims, strategic aims. These temporary measures may give us some kind of temporary relief and happiness, but long-term, till the time the border issue is not resolved, I think relations will continue to be very, very sore.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sajjanar, then, beyond the optics, beyond the border dispute, for you, from some of the other aspects of diplomacy, what would you be waiting for or hoping to get as a positive outcome of tomorrow's meeting?
Yeah, I think both the countries would really like to show that there is some forward movement, some positive outcome. As I said, a calibrated approach, but some progress needs to be shown. So, while issues like resumption of air flights, resumption of visits, visas, movement of students and some of the workers and some of the investments, although these issues, the Gaurie, don't fall strictly in the remit of the NSAs, because that discussed and decided by the diplomats when they meet, because the foreign secretary is also, supposed to meet his counterpart.
Yes.
So these issues are really for him to discuss, but I think to show some progress that there has been some movement in the, as far as the frozen relationship after the 2020 is concerned, we might see some indications of restoration of air flights, something happening on visas, on movement of students,
Yes.
or movement of businessmen, just to send out the message that this is happening. But I agree with General Meston, absolutely,
Yes.
that border issue is the crux. And first of all, even if the border issue is not resolved, to ensure that there is peace, stability, and tranquility on the borders, then
Exactly.
only other elements of the bilateral relationship can progress.
All right,
Gaurie.
we leave it there. Dr. Jha, I'm going to give you some airtime. I owe you that. Another day, maybe. This is a story that we're going to keep revisiting. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and speaking to me on India
Thank you,
Global.
Gaurie. Thank
And with
you.
that, we're completely out of time in this edition of India Global. Thanks so much for watching.